Okay. Right. Well, hello and welcome to the 10th installation of Project Nolan, which is our collection of reviews of all of Christopher Nolan's movies leading up to the release of his most recent film, Tenet, which came out around about a year ago. This has been a long project in the making, but the idea was to look at his films together, to consider the connections between them. And obviously the project was really started and the viewings were started before we saw Tenet. And this is we have reached the final film of his pre-Tenet era. It would be lovely to think that maybe his career will be divided into at least two parts, that we've done just one half of his work, considering how much we like it. But we are reviewing his 10th feature film today, Dunkirk. As always, with me is Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So this is Matt of Matt's Film Blog, which has kind of arrived and evolved since we started doing this project, really, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's something. It's our sort of, it's the newest content from us as content providers at South Sefton's campus of Hugh Baird College. I'm Nick, and I have a Nick's Media vlog as part of my website, Media Studies website, and over the years we've done various things under the name of South Sefton Scribble. So this is part of that. But yeah, like I said, this is our final movie, and we kind of rank ordered them at the beginning, and it was probably the most difficult part of this whole project. And the reason this is the final one we're reviewing is because this came in at number one for you, didn't Matt? Of all the pre-Tenet movies, this is your favourite. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. I thought it had changed and this list to be a bit more fluid. And it's been over a year since we started this, and I'd still probably have Dunkirk as number one.
Sorry, I was going to say, did that realization only happen to you when you were rewatching the movies, or did you anticipate it being number one and it kind of it confirmed what you thought?
I think I anticipated it being in my top three. I always thought Interstellar being me number one, and that had always been me number one. But I haven't watched them in such close proximity and back to back. Dunkirk, and we will talk about this more in the review, but it sort of contains all of the things I love about Nolan.
Right, that's immediately, I think that's really interesting to hear, because for me this stands out completely as an outlier from his work. And actually although I've made some notes of how it does maybe fit in within the canon, this feels so alien to some of the things that we've talked about. It doesn't necessarily sit in this. But first of all, as always, we usually do a synopsis. Last time was a real treat when I gave my synopsis of Inception, but Matt, you do a much better job of this than I do. So can you give us a quick synopsis of Nolan's 2017 movie, Dunkirk?
Yeah, so I've written this down, so I'm going to read this off a piece of paper just to get it accurate. So in May 1940, Germany advanced into France, trapping Allied troops on the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. Under the bombardment of Nazi planes and artillery, and over the course of 9 days, 300,000 British, French and Belgian troops are rescued from the beaches by any naval or civilian vessels that can be found. So the film is based upon the real evacuation of Dunkirk, and in the film, Nolan portrays the evacuation from three perspectives: land, air and sea. And each perspective is presented by an overlapping narrative, but each strand takes place over a different time period. So all the stuff on the land or the mole is 7 days, the sea is 24 hours, and the air is 1 hour. And the film tells the tale, of the evacuation of Dunkirk Beach in 1940.
Yeah, so this is immediately, I suppose, unique for the fact that this is the first film of Nolan's which tackles a real story, something that historically happened. Therefore, it also probably, certainly for Nolan's last few movies or past decade and a bit, it exists in a real world as well. I mean, we can't say that of too many of Nolan's films. That if we think of the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, Tenet itself, that there are things about that enter into the realm of fantasy. So that there's those two aspects of it. And to dive straight in, the one thing you didn't mention there, which immediately makes it very, very different to not only a Nolan film but to any other film. You didn't mention a main character.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. I wouldn't really say there is a main character. There's one central character or a couple of characters we follow in each of the three strands, but there's never. I mean, thinking about it now, I can't think of the actor who's on screen the most, the main character on the beach. If you like, don't even know if he's got a name. Actually, thinking about it now.
No.
And that's one of the things I like about the film, is that we talked in the past, haven't we, about auteur directors like Nolan, when they work within genres, they seem to like change it forever. And I think that's what's sort of happened with this film, because it's not a conventional war film where it doesn't promote the idea of heroes and villains. I mean, the Germans are only ever referred to as the enemy and they're never shown on screen. And it really gives a sense of a moment in time, and like almost like it's trying to communicate the emotion and the human aspect of it without promoting, like being jingoistic and promoting Britain as like the heroes and Germans as the enemies or anything like that. So that's one of the things I really love about it, is that it's more of an experience than like a character journey. You
mentioned genre films then, and of course this would fit neatly into that war genre of movies, and it feels so different to the war films of, say, the 20 years leading up to Dunkirk as a film, that were maybe a lot more heart pulling at sort of the emotions, or trying to situate you to align with a character or a quest, and sometimes that's done very, very well, like Saving Private Ryan. Sometimes it's done incredibly badly, like Pearl Harbor. But this feels actually so different to those. It feels almost like a more traditional, the kind of war film that was being released in the 1940s. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, one of the things about Dunkirk and placing this within the war genre is that it takes like the aesthetic and the setting of the war genre, but actually it rejects a lot of the other things that we associate. And I think what ruins films like Pearl Harbor, we haven't got no inspiring speeches, and I said, we no heroes in like a cinematic sense. And war for me has always been that thing of ordinary people thrown into extraordinary situations, and just surviving a war is winning.
Yeah,
as far as I can see, and that's what this film does, especially through Harry Styles' character. That he has these ideas of what a soldier should be or what's expected of them, and when he returns home, he's like ashamed, isn't he? And at the end, he said, like, we're just happy that you're home. That is the victory in itself. And I haven't seen a war film that's really, maybe since Apocalypse Now, actually, that's, for me at least, communicated the feeling of being in a war zone or in a specific battle.
Yeah, definitely. And it does do those things exceptionally well. And I think perhaps part of that is, as always, Nolan's strict adherence to a kind of either zero CGI or invisible CGI policy. Everything is done in real effects, isn't it? And it feels very sparse as a consequence, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's very cold, isn't it? The film. But going back to your point about war films of the 40s, this is the second like Dunkirk movie. There was an original, I think it was 1958.
Right.
And it's strange actually, because it's been on BBC Two quite like 2 or 3 times over the last lockdown, and I've been able to watch most of it, and that does try and give a sense of what it's like to be there, but that still also has like the big moral message in it, and it does position the Brits as like the heroes, and it's patriotic. Where this film is really stripped down, and I said that sort of the barren nature of the beach, and the fact that we have Tom Hardy's pilot is very much alone for a lot of the time, and it really is. In that, it portrays like the coldness and the isolation of war in that sense.
It's interesting. I think my it's weirdly is my opinions have kind of evolved on the film since we've been doing the project, because I watched all 10 movies before we even reviewed our first film on this. And well, obviously because we came up with the order and stuff, but when I was watching it, I saw it at the cinema the first time and loved it. I went to the big, the hugest IMAX to see it, because Nolan's work demands that, because he loves IMAX so much.
Yeah.
But then on second viewing, which was for this project, there were times when I felt that this was almost like the sort of film that is made to commemorate event like Dunkirk, but almost in something that could be shown. It sounds really derogatory, but something that would be shown maybe in a museum of Dunkirk. That it'd been almost felt like, has this movie been commissioned by a historical society or, almost government? I'm not that it's in any way propaganda, but do you know what I mean? That there's something that's, so maybe it's because it feels more real and more documentary about this. Is there anything to do with the roots of this movie? I mean, it was an anniversary or something like that?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, the timing of the film's release is very interesting because when I saw it on the cinema, there was two trailers that preceded it. One was Victoria and Abdullah, I think it was called, which is a film about Queen Victoria and how she was so kind and nice to her Indian, friends, not servants. And then after that, there was the trailer for The Darkest Hour, the Gary Oldman film, which deals with the reaction and to Dunkirk, and that's like where what inspired Churchill's famous speech. But I think as well, that's one of the only moments in the film where it feels quite. I mean, I would say it almost falls into the realm of like not propaganda, but you can see why people would say that is when the boats arrive and we get like Jerusalem and the music swells. And I think the presence of Kenneth Branagh, that like takes up the Britishness or Englishness, like that adds a couple of layers automatically, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think you can see it that way, and that was my initial response going to the cinema. I was like, wow, that was like basically an indoctrination to vote Brexit for 2.5 hours based on the trailers. I mean, it is literally, the British Army, and the rest have been forsaken by the rest of Europe. So I think people can see it like that, but for me, as you mentioned then, it's like the documentary approach and like the lack of CGI and the reliance on real practical effects shooting on location that I think, as I said earlier, with war films or films in this genre, we expect that moral message, and the absence of that does make it seem more realistic, or maybe it's trying to promote a very specific idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's the other thing there's a complete lack of as well is dialogue, which is incredible. I mean, it actually serves to include the lack of dialogue serves the purpose of including a few of famous narrative twists and turns from Nolan, one of which being that one of our main protagonists turns out to probably be French, I think, which is I haven't stuck my spoilers thing up today, but well, too bad. If you've got this far through our project and not seen Dunkirk, it's your own fault. But so the lack of dialogue is brilliant, and I think actually, for a filmmaker who occasionally is accused of giving his audience too much exposition through characters, maybe that's sort of studios asking him to just explain things a bit more. This had basically no explanation. You're thrown right into the dark, aren't you? In fact, the opening shot, there's no credits at the start. You just a lone figure on a windy street. You've got no ideas. Stuck in media res. It's a brilliant opening for a film, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. As this is what I said earlier about why I think this film, for me, expresses everything I love about Nolan perfectly. Because, as we said with Inception, and I'm sure we'll mention in Tenet, is that the idea sometimes gets in the way, and that then, like, the knock-on effect is that you have too much exposition. You have loads of characters all, explaining certain things. But with this one, the idea is so basic and so straightforward and expressed so clear at the start. We have X amount of time to get X amount of people off a beach.
Yeah.
So you don't need that dialogue. There's no need for the characters to be talking, explaining, time or anything like that. So I think it allows Nolan's technical ability to just be on display and come to the fore. And I just think this is like, on a technical level and just as a piece of like cinema, I just think it's absolutely exceptional. And it's not bogged down with all of the ideas. It's obviously what Hitchcock said. This is pure cinema for me. It was pure feeling, the whole film.
Yeah, and I think it's talking about pure cinema and being cinematic. I'm going to jump ahead of myself. It's certainly one of the absolutely amazing things about it, as it's cinematography. I am constantly surprised, and this film more than any other perhaps, that Nolan doesn't storyboard. It's ridiculous because some of the shots just feel perfectly composed. He uses all the stuff that we talk about composition when we introduce it in our subjects. He uses, light and shade, foreground and background, use of oblique angles to create shots. One of my favourites, I think this is probably very iconic of the movie, or certainly something you remember, is his use of patterns. In particular, I'm going to put it on screen now. Is the shot where can you see that one? Yeah. It's a shot where we have this incredible, again, rule of thirds there, incredible shot of all of these British soldiers' helmets. Create this incredible pattern, and then one soldier turning around so we can see his face to break the pattern. And it's chilling, isn't it? Because at that point, an Luftwaffe air fighter is going over, and that's what he's heard before anyone else can hear it. But there are so many moments like this, aren't there? With the composition of the shot is just perfect.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's throughout. So I think that's again one of his strengths, isn't it? And I've seen people we've seen people criticize Nolan on that front, and I just don't see it. I think he is absolutely brilliant. And I'm not sure if Wally Pfister was working on this film as a different cinematographer.
I checked this, and it wasn't. I think Wally Pfister's last movie might have been Dark Knight Rises. Actually, the guy who did this I looked this up before, but he might have been the guy. Did he do? I was going to say 2049, but that was Deakins, isn't it? Because there's got a real Roger Deakins feel about this movie, I think. But it's the guy that he's been working with since. And if you check his credentials, it's an incredible roll call. This cinematographer has done some amazing movies. But it just looks stunning, and like I said, it's just for a film that's light on dialogue and character. I think that's more than made up for through the use of camera.
Yeah. I think, it's been a while since I watched Dunkirk now, but from one of the things I remember, one of the things I get a sense of really of the film is that there's always like a slow movement in the camera, or a lot of the time a slow movement. And I think, again, whether we pick up on this as an audience, but that contributes to that slow creep and dread.
Yes.
That time is always moving forward very slowly, and that sort of window to escape is being, closed.
And what's interesting there is that that feeling is completely emphasized and heightened by the score, isn't it? Which is interesting because it is quite a cold film, and it is one that's not, doesn't rely on sort of character or even narrative points to necessarily sort of pull at the heartstrings. But it's Zimmer again, isn't it? Who manages to just create this feeling of dread throughout. There's moments where it was sort of it feels like the Dark Knight, that sort of high pitched whining sound.
Yeah, there's a term for it. It's a musical term and it's as far as I'm aware, Zimmer first used it in the theme for the Joker.
Right.
And it's that idea that sounds like a string on a violin or something is getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it keeps increasing. And it's an aural effect. I can't remember what it's called, but it's used the same. And the track is called, I think it's called Supermarine.
Yes.
It's what the track is called. And that is, and again, like Interstellar, it uses an element of that where it's got like a constant ticking sound in the background.
Yeah.
So there's this constant sound of something being tightened and getting increasing in intensity like throughout the entire film. And come back to what you said about that shot of all the soldiers standing and the one person turns around. Is the sound of the Spitfires is so important, isn't it, for sort of prefiguring something horrible is about to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And what's I think the thing that the genius about the soundtrack, and this threw me back to actually Blade Runner 2049 because Zimmer did the soundtrack for that. Is there are moments in the film where genuinely you're not sure whether the non-diegetic sound finishes and the diegetic sound picks up.
Yeah.
Obviously in Blade Runner it's because there's a lot of sort of science fiction-y, so if you like, noises that happen, where Zimmer takes the original Vangelis, I think, to another level. But with this, there are moments where that sound, that stretching, twisting sound, becomes the engine of a Messerschmitt or something, and you don't know whether it's just Zimmer's score or whether you're going to have an enemy fighter go over the top of your head.
Yeah, I found there's quite a few moments like that when they're in the dock and either one of the ships has been torpedoed or it's the ship you can hear like the twisting of the metal and the snapping of ropes and chains, but also in the soundtrack as well.
Yeah.
And yes, that's where it's just like so fully realized and so like cohesive, every element of the film, that it just works to express this idea. I mean, this feeling of war.
So there's this, you talk about sort of the cohesive feel, of course, that, film being a sum of its parts. And despite being stripping away certain sort of what we maybe consider to be essentials in main characters or heroes, protagonists, dialogue, this film makes some really interesting choices. One of which you've alluded to already is the casting of the movie. Harry Styles was only ever famous for being in kind of One Direction and a pop star for this, but it is a great bit of casting, isn't it? And he's very natural in this role, and it's
Yeah, I think he's got that look as well. Like there's a Chinese filmmaker called Troy Park, and I think he was asked a question about Troy and Brad Pitt being cast, because this Chinese filmmaker makes a lot of historical epics, and his quote was quite strange when he said he couldn't get into the film. He said some people just don't look.
Yeah.
Some people look modern, and some people look like they can fit. And Harry Styles, for me, has got that look. He looks like he could easily slot into 1940s society. He looks like he could be in the cast of Dad's Mummy.
Yeah.
And he's got that look. But I mean, when we talked about this, and we've had various students say certain things about Harry Styles being cast. But as soon as I heard Nolan had cast Harry Styles, me instant response as well, he must be an amazing actor.
Yeah, that's it.
And because if you know about his auditioning process, and he didn't get the job as a favour, he had to audition like everybody else, and apparently it's quite intensive. And the fact Nolan cast him is quite unusual. Like, he's not someone who's handed a celebrity like that. He's a notaire, isn't he? So as soon as he was cast, I thought he's probably going to be great, and he was really stand out. I thought he was excellent, actually.
And Branagh has he has that commanding presence, and it feels like, well, if anyone's going to be in a modern British war film, it should be him, because he carries himself in a way that represents those characters, and he does so without any kind of ego of needing to lead the film or be something special.
I think some of his dialogue, when he says it twice, I think, in the film, when he says he's talking to the head of the army or the RAF, and he says, "You can almost see it from here." He goes, "What?" And he goes, "Home." See, and any other actor saying that, it'd be a bit cheesy and cliche, but Branagh sells it because he is in this film. He is England, isn't he?
Yeah, and then of course, despite the fact that this film contains someone who is often considered one of the greatest actors of the modern era, Mark Rylance, despite his sort of lack of film or screen acting. For me, the standout performance in this movie is the young actor Barry Keogh, who has gone on to do other things since then, but he plays the young lad George, who is in this film for a very short amount of time. He steals every scene he's in. It's one of the most convincing naturalistic performances I've ever seen, ever.
Yeah, I agree. I remember this one of the first things we talked about. It's like, oh my, there's this kid in this film, and as you're right, I think he is only in the film for about 20, 25 minutes, if that. But you're right, it's just so natural. And he's obviously gone on to get some bigger roles, as in the Green Knight that's coming up. But I think the performances are great, and Hardy as well as the RAF pilot. And I think cast and unknowns as well in some of the other roles, like the main character, I wouldn't say protagonist, but I haven't really seen him in anything else, and he's totally believable. And on a side note, actually, I think one of the reasons why it resonates so much and I love it so much is that the actor, he really looks like my dad when he was a young man, like in early photos around his mouth. Yeah, really, really quite similar. So I think that's some sort of part of my response there.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, that's definitely.
Dad wasn't old enough to be in the war, but
but he was in the Navy, though, wasn't he? So that connection. And again, well, actually, some of those real life touches with real life, or we talk about the realism that Nolan can bring to a film. Even if it's fantastical, or even if it's set 80, years in the past or whatever. I know this has been talked about, but some of those effects that are used to create tension, we often bemoan the fact that special effects these days just get lost in the ether or just become there for the sake of it. But there are some special effects in this movie which are almost heart-wrenching. The one in particular is where the bombs are dropped along the beach. And again, in an amazing bit of cinematography, we see explosions from the distance getting closer and closer to our our protagonist who's laying on the beach, and they stop short just before he's about to be blown.
Again, I think I've watched the making of actually, and for that sequence, that's all in camera. The only CGI is there to remove wires on the actor. He's a real person. And I think they maybe might have exaggerated one or two explosions, but again, it's that Nolan thing. If you can do it in camera, you will.
Yeah.
And it's little things, I mean, I think Lucasfilm understand this because they sort of incorporate that idea into the market of their films, don't they? But for most film audiences, probably don't care. But when you're watching it, I think we just know. I think intrinsically we understand that it's real, and that just heightens the impact so much.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I mean, talk about the marketing. We usually show the poster for these movies, and I dug one out. I think the one you've got behind you actually is similar. What's intriguing about this is that this particular poster, and again, it's very rare that the filmmakers would have much input into this, but it does recall The Dark Knight, doesn't it? There are.
Signifying tall structures in the background, and
definitely that
skyscraper. But I mean, this is most similar, you're right, to the Dark Knight main poster where he is standing in front of the burning building. There's like one man, as it says there, the event that shaped the world, one man to save, between us and destruction or whatever.
Even the color schemes of those blues, which were the Dark Knight. I don't know. Is that a sort of a safety device for making sure that people know this is from the same filmmaker? But but then what I was going to use this was to say that, as I said at the top, for us going through this project, and this, there are so many things that move this away from Nolan. Thematically, we've got no flawed hero. We've got no people being obsessed with things. We've got no learning from mistakes. We've got no wanting to be tricked. Or for me, I can't necessarily see this as a film about filmmaking again. So where do you see, first of all, what do you see as the main themes of this movie? And are there any can you make any thematic links between this and Nolan's other work at all?
I haven't really thought about it on a thematic level necessarily, in terms of linking to his other work. I don't really think it links. What I meant with my original comment is, I think we have the playing with narrative and playing with time.
Yeah.
And I think what I like about it is that at the start it does indicate that each narrative strand takes place over a different time period, but after that, it's there if you want it. If not, it is cut together as if it's parallel narratives. So it works on multiple levels like that. So it's very clever in the way it's constructed and its approach to narrative. I think you have a sense of it's more men in crisis just generally than a man in crisis. So I know that's a bit broad. You have parallel narratives. But I think it's more just like the technical side of it and his ability to create tension and sort of engage the audience and get the audience wrapped up in the world he's creating. I just felt that was like quite overwhelming in the film, actually.
Yeah.
And the use of Zimmer, it's hard to articulate, but that sound is so distinctive between him and Nolan. And that sort of constant use of like the micro elements, if you like, to drive tension, as opposed to using like dialogue and things like that. And you think about the narrative of this film, what's interesting is that none of the actions the characters do actually have really any narrative relevance or contribute towards the progression, because we know they're going to get saved. So it's little human moments in there, and the tension and everything is built from the pace of the edit and the use of sounds and the threat or the incoming threat of planes and stuff like that. But thematically, I guess you have redemption with the Harry Styles character at the end, is that he's redeemed. And if you want to take it a bit further, we always have two versions of one character. I think Harry Styles and the main character, they're two approaches or two sort of reactions to war. But I think more just on like a technical level is what I meant, and like the way the film is constructed, it really is pure Nolan without all the distraction of the big idea.
That's it. And I think actually when I remember watching this at the cinema thinking, right, okay, how's he going to do his trademark narrative shenanigans, switcheroos, whatever you want to call it. And then got about 10 minutes in and I thought, oh, maybe he's not. Okay, I can understand that. It might not be appropriate. It might seem exploitative to do some kind of narrative switch
Yeah.
just for a film that's based on real people's experiences. But then he does do the 1 week, 1 day, 1 hour thing. And as you said, it's there if you want it. And it is I think it's brilliantly clever the way that works together. But it's not done in an exploitative way that says that this is more important than the story. You know, it's something it works if you're interested in piecing together a puzzle. It does make us aware of the way that film, in fact, maybe more than any of his other movies, it makes us aware of how film time is different to real time. So perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe this is a film about films after all. But it's done very subtly. You know, I really enjoyed that aspect of it because I didn't feel like it was thrown in my face in the way that Memento, you know, makes you pay attention. But it's still very, very clever nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that, as I said at the start, it's like the experience of war, and obviously different people, whether in the land army, the navy, the sea, have different experiences. So you know, just having 1 hour of fuel, like it really gives us a real sense of the jeopardy and heroism of, you know, RAF pilots and that type of stuff, and like these extreme situations. But then you have the other side of it, the more drawn out, I imagine much more traumatic experiences of being on the beach and that sort of long drawn out nature of it. And by sort of, you know, combining all three, it really gives a real sense of what it was like. But as you said, it's there if you want to, you know, analyze it and sort of break it down that way. Otherwise, it's just there to sort of facilitate the tension.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's maybe yet another one in the eye for the Nolan can't do action, because you're exactly right. You know, to recreate the sense of making a week feel like a week on screen, and to really make the characters feel like they're every second is a second where they're potentially life is at risk, compared to an RAF pilot who's got an hour of fuel, whereby that goes ridiculously quickly. It's just a genius way of positioning your audience.
You're right. I just thought about like this, to express it more clear or concisely for me. This is the Nolan version of, you know, can he do it on a cold Tuesday night in Stoke? So, but yeah, he can actually, and he does it better than anyone else, because he hasn't got all those toys he usually plays with. And what he created is, for me, is something that is just so, you know, for me, what's cinematic is that you totally transport and it's believable. And you know, we teach documentary as well in the class, and we say one of the things about documentaries, it's not about presenting reality as it is. It's like the point of documentary is that you understand and have an understanding of what happened in reality.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in this film. I know it's not real, and I know the narrative plays with time, and I know these characters aren't real, but I feel I've got a real sense of what it would be like to be in that situation, that specific moment, than any other film, and especially the original Dunkirk never communicated that.
That's really interesting, because I think that whatever happened, you know, when you get a big budget film on a real life event, it kind of draws a line under that event for a certain amount of time, doesn't it? You know, there would be no point making a film about the Titanic probably for another 30 years. You know, I'm sure it will happen again. It was a big occasion, but for a one-off event, you know, once someone's done it on that scale. So it was clear that once this film was made, there'd probably no need for another Dunkirk movie on a scale for maybe another 50 years. But so I knew it was in safe hands, but I was also aware that some people, even people, you know, maybe more so people that didn't live during that event, who are only aware of the sort of the mythology of Dunkirk, the Miracle of Dunkirk, as it's known, wrap it up in a lot of emotion. And I thought, well, these people are maybe going to be not necessarily disappointed, but it's going to be unusual, because I think a lot of people would have assumed that a movie about the Miracle of Dunkirk would have been properly digging into, you know, the heart wrenching, the kind of the fist pumping and the joy, because this film doesn't do any of that really. I felt emotional during the film, but I didn't feel close to tears. But I was glad. I didn't feel at any point like I'd been exploited or that my emotions had been manipulated, even though of course they have by music and cinematography. But I didn't feel like I'd been put through the ringer to understand this moment in history.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only time that really the film does veer towards that slightly for me, as I said before, is when the boats arrive. And I feel like that's very much for like the audience. That's like our moments, because, you know, I mean, the way I described the music, Nolan and Zimmer have been tightening the screw for an hour and a half, and we're sitting there. And, you know, I don't know if I imagine if when I was watching it, or if other people were watching it afterwards, I'd have like white knuckles. I wouldn't, you know, because like you're just like so into it. But apart from that moment, you're right. And I said I think the intention of the film is not to glamorize it or present it as heroic, and as not even present it as like heroes versus villains.
Yeah.
This is an exceptional moment, and I think, as I keep saying, it really expressed what that was like to be there, rather than the ideologies associated with it or anything like that.
Yeah, like you said, I think to go back to your first point, it's the guy. It's when the soldiers arrive back. They're in England by train. They're they're not still cheering and everything like that. They're completely down, aren't they? They're knackered and everything. But it's that one guy who speaks to Harry Styles and says, "Well done" or something. He's blind, isn't he? I don't know if this is meant to be
blind.
sort of
Nolan's uncle, isn't it?
Oh, is it really? I didn't know if it was meant to be some kind of, the sort of crowbarred the blind to those who can see the reality,
Yeah.
But he says, "Well done," and Harry Styles says, "Oh, we lost," or something, and he says, "No, you survived, and that's what's important."
And Hollywood, the way Hollywood treats war, it is so narrow in its viewpoints, and it's the way it expresses morality. And I said earlier, you have to have a hero and a villain. I said this is just like, as I said at the start, surviving is winning, isn't it?
Interesting that, because we talked in the last video about the ideology of Christopher Nolan. Does he pin his mask to anything? This is almost kind of an anti-war and a pro-war. It sort of celebrates a moment in history, but in a kind of almost anti-war. But it doesn't go out of its way to say war is terrible or war is necessary. It feels utterly neutral, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's it's the nail on the head, actually, because on Rotten Tomatoes it's got like a very high critical and audience response. But I was doing a bit of googling of what people criticize the film for, and a lot of the people who criticize it pinpoint these things exactly. That it's, I think basically people say it's either promoting one view of Britain and war, or a positive one or a negative one. I think you're right. I think the film is neutral. I think what audiences have done, or these critics have done, have projected their own views onto the film to either critique it or support their views. But I agree, it is totally neutral, and it allows you as an audience member to, as I said, just experience it. And I think if anyone does view it as pro or anti-war, or pro or anti-British or anything like that, again, that's more of a projection, because we haven't got. I mean, I can't think of a way someone would sort of argue that it is any of those things, because, as you said, no one talks. All the decisions and all the actions the character do have no bearing on the narrative, and the end of the film's message is well done for making it.
Yeah,
not
definitely.
For beating the Germans or.
And that fact that we don't see, the Germans or the enemy is really significant, isn't it? It's I think that's quite an important part, because it's saying we're only telling this story from the people that we know this story from. We can't speak for other people, So there's no. The lack of representation doesn't necessarily make it negative in this perspective, because it just means it's devoid of stereotypes. In fact, when Hardy's pilot crash lands, do we see the soldiers just sort of in front of him? We don't see their faces, do we? Or
no, you just see, I think, like shadowy figures emerging through the like coming over the dunes at the side.
Even that final shot with him with a flare in his hand is quite iconic, isn't it?
But even, as you said, it's known as the Miracle of Dunkirk in Britain, isn't it? And that's that way of sort of changing the perception of like a real event. Like, it wasn't a miracle; it was an amazing group of individuals who came together to do something extraordinary. It's not miraculous. It's incredible sort of moment. You know what I mean? So.
Am I right? Is this? I suppose, is this his first film where he's set in England? I suppose. What do you call it? Prestige. Is that meant to be set in the
following?
London?
Yeah, it's like Victorian in the following.
Yeah. Which itself, I mean, for a man who's worked so well in an American studio system, a little love letter to England like that is quite interesting to see.
Saying that, it's only the last 5 minutes in England.
Yeah, well, I suppose.
Very much characters.
I suppose so. Well, you see them leave from the various sort of ports and harbours on the coast, but it's a nice little touch to see him make a movie that is sort of England based, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Do you think? Okay, so just to sort of tie this up a little bit, do you think we'll see Nolan make any other historical movies, or is he, like most genres, been there, done that, move along?
I don't know, actually, because when Nolan talked about Dunkirk, he did mention that this was something he has a deep interest in anyway. So I'm not. I mean, I don't know enough about him to know what his interests are, or if he's interested in a particular period in history. I think after Tenet's sort of like what's the right phrase for it? It's like a reset, like a cleanser, as far as I can tell, because I don't know, I think it's impossible to predict what's going to happen now. And as you said earlier, I think Tenet will be like the middle, like that's the end of the first era of Nolan, if you like, and now we're moving into another one. So I would be equally not surprised and surprised no matter what he announces next.
Yeah.
But again, I do, after Dunkirk, pretty certain that wherever he does, it will be his own unique take on it.
Yeah.
And he's never going to fall into that trap of, the Michael Bay approach of historical events where he'll using it to just reinforce his own view of the world.
I mean, second guessing Nolan is always very, very tricky, despite our attempts to collect his work and ideas together. But what discussing his impact on the industry is a little bit more provable. Certainly, we talk about the Dark Knight trilogy changing superhero movies, or the way that they're perceived and the way that they're done. I would say I don't think really Inception or Interstellar has done much to alter science fiction and the way that that's done. So where does this one sit? Does this change war films for good, or is this people say, Nolan does his own thing, we'll carry on making war films the way that they're expected to be made?
I think it will change war films. This is again the sign of a true auteur and all, and I think it's quite similar to what happens. I think with Ridley Scott is that up until the late 70s, sci-fi was not taken that seriously, and I'm not talking like Star Wars, like the stuff that's got one foot in fantasy, science fiction. It was always like a bit of a joke and not really taken seriously, and always relegated to like B movies. Then Alien Invasion will come along, and that elevated sci-fi to something else. Not just in terms of like how people perceive or how it's positioned within, like critical, or like even in society and how people perceive it, but it changed the look and the feel of sci-fi. So sci-fi became a lot darker, a lot more on the surface with like these existential threats we've created, as opposed to like extraterrestrials or anything like that. And I feel like Dunkirk will do the same for the war genre. And I felt like that one of the first things that coming out of Blade Runner 2049 is like that's just killed. It's a genre killer. I remember saying that to you, and this is a genre killer in the sense that there are going to be pre-Dunkirk and post-Dunkirk war films, and the only big war film I'm aware of that's come out since then is 1917, and that plays around with narrative. It's all one shot, and I think that's what we're going to get now. And again, in the postmodern age and all that, I don't think there's any space for these, ultra nationalistic, patriotic war films anymore. I think we're a bit more. That generation is no longer the mainstream generation. So I think we are going to see definitely new types of war films.
Yeah, be interesting. Definitely. It reminds me a little bit of the video essay the vlogger Lindsay Ellis does on sci-fi and post 9/11, comparing Independence Day with what's the Spielberg one you used to study on your course, the War of the Worlds, and just how different those films are from one another in the way that they approach tragedy or world-destroying technologies and stuff like that. So I think you're right. I think that these films, I think just also the current mood and current culture and things like that, maybe the MCU or superhero movies are used as a way of a cipher for these things, or an acceptable way of doing big crash bang wallop movies, because representing something people are far too sensitive to. I'm not saying too sensitive as in they shouldn't feel it, but I think there is a sensitivity to recreating something real and doing it in an unreal crash bang wallop way. People realize that's not appropriate anymore.
Oh, definitely. And I think so many things have happened in like the last 20, 30 years, haven't they? Like society and the world has changed. But I think if you're tying this back to Nolan's work, like as a this is like a post 9/11 war film, because you could get away with like the Saving Private Ryans and the Pearl Harbors around that or before that time. But now with the advent of the internet, and we have so much more access to information, and we've seen America transition away from the world police, the world good guys, to this sort of morally ambiguous force in the world, that I don't think they can get away with war films like that anymore. And you're right, we are more sensitive to these things, and we know more basically as a mainstream audience now, don't we, as a society? So it's harder for filmmakers to get away with that.
Actually, it's interesting you say it, because did this come out? Did you say it was at the same time? Was this before or after the Darkest Hour?
It was the same, let's say the same year, the same Oscar cycle. So the trailer for Darkest Hour was on for Dunkirk, so it was about 2 months later.
Because I've seen that film and I really didn't enjoy it. I found Gary.
Yeah.
I love Gary Oldman. I think he's a fantastic actor, but I found his performance to be almost like a caricature.
Yeah.
I thought it was. Yeah, I know it was meant to look at maybe the flawed man, but it really didn't. Maybe scratch the surface as to what we now know about Churchill, and
Yeah.
Dunkirk feels the kind of the antithesis of that. So if you're looking at two different war films from a very current era that feel very different, I would contrast this with Darkest Hour.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Darkest Hour is it. When I saw the trailer, I had no interest in watching it. Partly for that reason, it was like a caricature. You know, if I want to see these speeches, I can just listen to it on YouTube. But also as well, think that version of Britishness that obviously is the legacy of colonialism and the empire. That sort of ends with like the boomer generation, doesn't it? Really, like Gen Z, X, Y. I think we are a little bit more critical of things like that. And for us, you know, we've been told these stories, and I don't know if you found this, but as an individual growing older, you know, characters like Churchill, these are just historical figures. That emotional connection isn't quite there for us, so we're not going to go into that with, you know, already one tear coming out of our eye, waiting for these amazing moments to reinforce our views, our prejudices, wherever they are. Where we just view this as like, why are we sort of lauding this guy? He did great things, but I said in very, very recent times, there's been a backlash to Churchill.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
those type of things. I said that binary of good and evil. It doesn't sort of suit the modern world. It's too complex.
Definitely, and that's right, and that's exactly why your summation of this movie is so spot on, because at the end, you know, there wasn't that mythologizing, glorifying, whatever it is, that word, or hagiography, is that the right word? But of what Dunkirk was. This is very matter of fact, but it's dramatic, and it knows it's a film that it needs to, you know, to make people feel, but at the same time it doesn't stick an agenda on it, and it knows that, which is incredible, really.
Yeah, and I said my final point, and I think to come back to what it's called the Miracle of Dunkirk. It's like, it's not a miracle to me. It's like watching it. This is awful people creating awful situations that normal people are subjected to, and the fact that they escaped is not a miracle. It's amazing, but everything about it is awful.
Yeah.
Like, there's no heroism to be found.
No, definitely. Really, really interesting movie. Like I said, it's so, and of course, your number one. It found its way to be, I can't remember, 7 or 8 on my list, which was
when we did the list, that was the one that was most surprised by. I think I don't know, not surprised that it'd be not in your top 5, but like to be 8, I thought it'd be like 6 or something like that. But
it was so difficult.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, but I do you know what, I think, like I said, I think having discussed his movies for, you know, for getting on for 6 to 7 hours now on these videos, that I think watching it again, I'd probably enjoy it more. But I think it is a great war film. I hope it does do, you know, even if it doesn't change war films, I think it's still there as an incredible artifact of filmmaking. I love the attention to detail. You know, I think they actually used old proper Supermarine Spitfires to make the movie and stuff. So it is a great movie, and you know, and it stands alone from his work, of course, as well. Brilliant.
I think we'll have a lasting legacy, because this is the only film that where, speaking to people in my family or people I know, it was like a really intergenerational thing. It seemed this is like quite in Britain, at least, like this was like an event, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I had like my parents going and older relatives going, but younger relatives, and it seemed to be quite like an important film in that sense. And hopefully, as I said, it was like a palate cleanser for everybody. Is like, you know, this is now how we view this event. We don't really view it through these nostalgic lenses anymore. We break it down for what it was.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. And then we get Tenet, which is what we're on to next, which could not be more different, really, in many ways to this film. But maybe it's got similarities. We will only know when we discuss this in more detail next time.
Well, actually, the only thing I'll say about Tenet in this review is that this film manifests everything I love about Nolan, and Tenet is the exact opposite. It's everything I don't
Spoiler
like.
alert. How did the Tenet screening go? Yeah, but okay. Well, we kind of, I think, hinted at our certain ambivalence towards the film. However, a year has passed, almost a year. No, we saw it in September, didn't we, Tenet? So it's sometime, quite a lot of water has passed under that bridge, and another chunk of pandemic. I've rewatched the movie, so my feelings have evolved somewhat on the film since the first screening. Did you say you've seen Tenet a second time now?
I saw it twice in the cinema and I haven't seen it since, but I will watch it over the next few days actually, and then I'll watch it again before we do the review.
Yeah, okay. I think that's
So if I come back and I'm like, it's amazing, just
yeah. It does need a second rewatch. I don't think my views have evolved. I don't think my opinions overall of it have changed too much, maybe, but it will be interesting nonetheless. But for Dunkirk, certainly, I wholeheartedly recommend it as a movie. Standalone, Nolan fan, war film, not a war film fan. I think there's something to be admired there for lots of reasons. And hopefully even the old Harry Styles diehard fans would have been brought to, in the audience. I felt particularly smug as I spotted the Michael Caine cameo, which is...
I remember getting a text message off you actually on WhatsApp.
Yeah, right.
Like racking my brains and I couldn't, and then...
Yeah, blink and you miss it, so to speak. But yeah, great stuff. All right, well, thanks very much, Matt. That was a really interesting one. And yeah, we'll be back again next time for our final, probably final review for a few years anyway of Christopher Nolan's Tenet. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye.